Hi, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, a panel discussion looking at 5 major IT trends that will challenge the healthcare industry in 2024. I'm going to take a quick moment to take us through the agenda and then introduce Data Prize and why we are having this conversation, and then bring in our expert speakers to get to the real reason why you are joining us today. So first things first, our agenda. As I mentioned, we're going to do some introductions, and then we're going to get into the content of today's discussion. We're going to talk about some of the biggest challenges that we see and anticipate will continue to challenge healthcare organizations in the coming year. But then we're going to get more specifically into how organizations can help address these implications and help talking about what are some of the items that you need to be thinking about. If there's time, we'll open it up for questions. If we are not able to answer your questions, we will be sure to do that post-event, so please still take a moment to stick them into the GoToWebinar interface, and as we have time, we will address them. So quickly, just a little bit about Data Prize. We are a national managed services provider. We have a deep concentration of clients within the healthcare industry and provide a range of services for them. At the top level, we aim to be their end-to-end technology provider, providing them everything from their cybersecurity solutions and data protection to supporting their end users and their environment on a day-to-day basis, so they can continue to focus on providing the best level of care to their patients, as well as looking forward on how they can stay compliant with regulations and evolve their organizations. So with that, I'm Mary Beth Hamilton, Chief Marketing Officer here at Data Prize. I am joined by Jeff Richard from Veeam, who is the Vice President of Solution Strategy over there. Jeff, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Great. I also have my colleagues, Stephen Jones. You will hear me refer to him as Jones. I say that now so that I don't confuse everyone, but he is our Vice President of Cybersecurity. Jones, thanks for joining us. And then I have Tara Bartels, who is the practice lead of our advisory services organization. Tara, thank you as well.
Hi, Mary Beth.
So now over to the trends that we are going to be talking about. As I mentioned, we are going to be hitting on key ones that we see coming forward in the industry. These are the 5 that we will dig into. The first, looking at regulations and compliance. The second one, cybersecurity. The third being data protection. And we really view that sort of cybersecurity and data protection as 2 sides of the same coin. So we're really excited to be able to touch on both of those and how they're shaping what's going on in the industry. We'll also dig more into how mobility is transforming, and mobile device use within the healthcare industry is transforming how data needs to be protected and monitored. And then finally, we're just going to do a general trend of departments across the healthcare industry are being challenged with new elements and being forced to rethink them. So this is our spot where we sort of tie a lot of things together into one general number 5 category. So with that, Tara, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off talking about what you're seeing from a regulations and compliance perspective.
Sure, yeah. So what we see is that health systems continue to invest in HIPAA compliant technologies. And there's more and more technologies now that are supporting HIPAA compliance. But it goes beyond that, though. Health organizations also have to put in place supporting processes. So you're not just getting that piece of technology, but you have to have processes that support the HIPAA compliance for that technology. There are notable areas of exposure, and they're typically related to patient privacy, billing, and also patient care itself, which can be a little daunting as a patient, of course. And then the notion of, HIPAA compliance and security melding together. The way to think about that is when we look at data breaches, right? Data breaches for electronic medical record systems. What that actually is translating to is the unauthorized disclosure of protected health information, which is, a fundamental component to HIPAA legislation. On the plus side, right, compliance automation software does help a lot with risk assessment. That way providers can focus on remediation and improving security. And a lot of that compliance automation software is now more and more accessible to those small and mid-sized health practices, which really helps them stay compliant and know their risk areas and what they're exposed to currently.
Perfect. And Tara, thanks for framing that off. Now we're going to go to the next slide, which looks at, I'm going to ask each of our experts to sort of weigh in here on the implications across IT. Tara, I'll have you kick us off, and then Jones, we'll put you on deck with Jeff next. So Tara, take it over.
Sure. Yeah, as I just mentioned, so compliance automation software, it's something that we used to see more in use in large systems and large practices, because it used to be somewhat cost prohibitive for a lot of smaller size organizations to use it. But now it really is accessible. There's a lot of great tools out there, and a lot of them have terrific integrations into different systems that really help you look at it all from like a single pane of glass. Not all practices can afford their own compliance department, right? And we see that quite a bit, where even with large multi-state, national healthcare systems, the headquartered compliance department might be a couple people, a few people who have a large area of responsibility. But it doesn't mean that HIPAA is any less of a focus or any less of a priority. It is something that they just have to juggle. Compliance efforts can slow overall transformation. That's something that we see, from time to time, where, in a lot of other industries, when you're pursuing that digital transformation, a lot of people, what we call in industry, right, bleeding edge, which is a step further than cutting edge, where everyone wants to be on the forefront of, technical innovation. Compliance can slow that up, and to a degree, I want to be careful saying this, but it should. I don't want it to all come to a standstill, but compliance is the main driver for the healthcare industry. So technology is such an important part, especially as it's related to patient care, but every step of the way, we have to make sure that compliance is the effort. Laws and regulations definitely have to catch up in some ways. There are things that have been in people's focus for quite a while, for major EMR systems, such as disaster recovery requirements, or having secure ways to access those things. When you visit your local emergency room, though, today, if you're brought there, you as the patient, aren't presented with the option of opting out of their electronic medical record system. And it's not something that we think about too often, but even recently in the news, across several states, there's over a dozen hospitals in a single healthcare system that right now still have their EMR under a ransomware attack, and they've been offline now for 10+ days. So having that, those patient records that are then in the hands of somebody else or forwarded on to the dark web, it does kind of give you pause as a patient and say, well, what could I have done differently, right? And a lot of times as a patient, you feel a little bit powerless because there doesn't seem to be that you could have done anything differently. Cyber insurance itself is getting more specific. We see this with our clients year over year, where, several years ago, the cybersecurity questionnaires, you could get through them in a day. You might have to talk to a few people, but it was a doable task. Now into the hundreds of questions for some of them. Cyber insurers want to make sure that if they are paying out in an event, that the covered entity has done everything they could in advance to try to protect their systems and protect those patient records.
So we ended with cyber one, and spoiler alert, cyber is the next topic we're going to dig into. So Jones, I don't want you to get too deep into that, but from the aspect of where you're seeing sort of the regulations and compliance components shape the client's cybersecurity initiatives that you're working with, would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. So I see a couple of big changes coming to healthcare regulations. So you have this year, the White House released its new national cybersecurity policy and or strategy rather. And this is outlining a lot of big changes that are going to be coming. And there's some other very specific things coming out of HHS. It is no surprise that government tends to lag behind the rest of industry when it comes to things. So HHS is coming out. There's a paper they've published. They're now thinking about how to increase the cybersecurity and risk management of the public health practices and things like that. So they've got some cybersecurity performance goals that are coming out. This is going to change the way organizations have to comply and show compliance, and is going to expand the things that kind of fall under that purview. So absolutely everything Tara said is spot on, and this is going to become a much larger thing that all healthcare organizations are going to have to deal with.
Yep.
Jeff, anything you can add there on what you're seeing?
Well, we saw a lot in the COVID era of cybersecurity vulnerabilities and openings for patient data to be exfiltrated or patient data to be not adequately protected, because a lot of folks tried to transform quickly to provide remote healthcare, remote patient services, things like that. And when you make technical changes, you don't always keep up. One technical change that's been in the news a lot in 2023 and is only going to be more in the news is the use of generative AI for things like diagnostics, for things like other patient care functions. There's stories you hear, podcasts and news stories about this all the time. What's interesting about that is that I think we're going to see the healthcare regulatory environment struggling to catch up with that in 2024, and it's going to add new layers of compliance around data, around how diagnostic decisions are being made and tracked, and all that sort of thing. They're going to percolate down to to your point, it's not just going to be big practices, it's going to be every level of practice taking advantage of this kind of service. And it'll be interesting to see what the effect of that kind of technological change is on healthcare practices compliance burden. But I think it's safe to predict it'll be going up in 2024, 2025.
No doubt AI is also going to be bringing big changes to the industry and across the board. So on that one, not an AI related topics, but we definitely see cybersecurity risks evolving alongside AI. But Jones, I want to bring you in here to a topic obviously near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely, yeah. So cyber attacks are absolutely increasing in frequency and complexity. I think this is going to be the same across every vertical, but healthcare is certainly no different. So the proliferation of ransomware as a service, I think this is one of the things I would like to highlight, is that ransomware as a service has matured to the point that these organizations look like major corporations. They have HR teams, they have help desk functions, they have profit sharing models and things like this. It's crazy how professional this type of service has gotten, and it's really because it's very effective, right? So they took and kind of melded the technical superiority of these attackers, these threat actors, and mushed in some business acumen, and you get ransomware as a service. So there's literally app stores where you can go buy these things and deploy them, which means it's now more accessible to folks, right? So, I mean, we still have your major threat actors, your nation states, your branded named groups, but now this is accessible to most people with the initiative and a little tech know-how. So that makes things a lot more dangerous, right? Because now you can have people that are acting on maybe not even purely financial motives, right? Just I can do it because I can do it motive. To touch on Jeff's mention of generative AI, there are certainly some very incredible things happening here with AI and the ability to do things like detect cancers and things like that. However, for every iteration that we have in technology, one of the very first things that tends to happen with it is people figure out how to abuse it, how to use it for making money, or doing nefarious things, right? So this is exactly happening with cyber attacks. We see a huge uptick in using generative AI to write emails, phishing emails in languages that you may not be native in, right? A lot of these things tend to originate from non-English speakers, or English isn't a primary language. And that always used to be a hallmark, the way of identifying a phishing email: poor grammar, poor spelling, using phrases that native English speakers just don't use. This isn't happening anymore because generative AI now has the power of the internet to harness generating conversant and fluent emails in any language that you want. So this has also now expanded the attack surface and made it increasingly difficult to detect. Telehealth and telemedicine platforms are great as well. Not only have most other workers moved to doing stuff at home, now doctors can do stuff at home too, right? And this is great. However, because it relies entirely on technology, to Tara's earlier comment about the EMR platforms, we're seeing more and more things moving into them, more and more organizations standing them up, and doing so in insecure manners, right? And coupling this with some of the brand new generative AI that can do video and voice fakes, this is really kind of a dangerous frontier that's going to happen here. File transfers, we've seen some very big vulnerabilities in the past year or two. MoveIt is the one that comes to mind the most, where millions and millions and millions of documents were exploited because of a vulnerability, a public-facing vulnerability in a file transfer software that's often used for law firms and hospitals and things like that. So I think we're going to see absolutely a huge increase in the reliance on third parties to help secure these things. Hospitals by nature are not technology companies usually. They're healthcare organizations. And so I think there's going to be a huge move to outsourcing a ton of cybersecurity help and assistance from outside organizations.
Excellent. And then to double click on that one, because we're going to talk more about the implications. But Jeff, I wanted to bring you here. This is obviously an area that Veeam's done a number of studies on, to talk through some of the stats that you've seen to sort of even put a finer point on all those items that Joan just covered.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of our viewers that don't know, Veeam is an enterprise software backup company, and we like to keep tabs on what's going on in the data protection market to make sure that we're headed the right way and that we understand what our customers are facing. So we do a couple of big research projects every year around data protection, and recently around ransomware specifically. What's interesting, if you look at the numbers, in this past year's data protection trends report, we learned that 85% of organizations, this is over 4,000 organizations globally that we hired a research company to survey, had experienced a ransomware attack. Now, that does not mean they'd experienced an adversary trying to get on their network, because that happens to most organizations hundreds of times a day all over the world. What that stat means is that an adversary did get on the network and succeeded or attempted with some degree of success to detonate a ransomware attack. That 85% is up from 76% the previous year, right? So it was already bad in the 2022 data protection trends report when we asked this question, and it only got 9% worse in this year, in 2023. My suspicion is that when we see the 2024 numbers, we'll see it either stable or have increased again, because when I talk to organizations, I don't hear anyone say the threat has receded in the past year. If we look at what happened after a threat actor got on the network and set off a ransomware attack, even maybe more disturbing than that 85% number is that only 16% of organizations that we asked in the survey were able to recover their data without paying a ransom. So 84%, huge majority of organizations, did not have backups and security in place sufficient that they could actually recover their critical systems without paying a ransom. And unfortunately, if anyone here watching today's webinar has senior financial or executive leadership who believe that paying a ransom is still the answer to this problem, 25% of these organizations paid a ransom and still didn't get their data back. Because after all, the threat actors aren't there to help us, they're there to hurt us. Their software is optimized to exfiltrate data and to encrypt data. And so it's not terribly surprising that folks who have broken into our network to harm us don't prioritize getting us our data back even when we pay a ransom. So the problem is pretty stark. We'll talk more about this in just a minute, but it is worth mentioning a couple of additional points, and they're noted here in text on this slide. It is now almost inevitable that backups will be attacked as well as production data, because adversaries know if you've got a secure backup, then you don't have to pay a ransom. And while in the past, we have seen some organizations that have gone to cloud-based services, exactly like Tara and Stephen have been talking about so far, basically relying on third-party services for different kinds of technical services. The fact is that those cloud technologies are attacked just as frequently as the technology assets that you've got in your own data centers and remote offices. So thinking about how am I securing my cloud data, or how is my service provider securing their data that they have up in the cloud service they're providing to me, is also really, really critical for healthcare practices now.
That's a great point. And it's shocking to hear that there's no, what is the saying, honor among thieves? Jones, I feel like I've heard you use that one. But Jeff, thanks for sharing that. Jones, do you have a story or sort of any anecdote that I'm sure you see this often with clients?
I do.
Protect ours.
Yeah, I do. And I have a story, fortunately not with a client of ours, but this is a very public situation that's been playing out for almost 2 months. There's a company, Henry Schein. They are one of the world's largest dental, medical, and veterinary supply corporations. They were compromised almost 2 months ago by ALF-V, which is also known as Black Cat. And if that name sounds familiar, this is the same group that compromised MGM Grand and ransomwared their environment. So this actor has re-encrypted the Henry Schein network 3 times successfully. That's why the incident has been playing out for almost 2 months. They've exfiltrated an estimated 35 terabytes of data, including the company's entire payroll data. So this is, to Jeff's point, this is becoming incredibly more common, but this is a real world example that is playing out on the world stage right now, that is impacting tons of medical organizations. This company has been largely unable to do most business for almost 2 months. Whether they survive this or not is largely dependent on if they're able to get their arms around it. But this is a very serious situation, and something that I think everybody should be aware of in the healthcare industry. And I think the takeaway here is that cybersecurity is not a cost; it's an investment in your organization, and this is why you invest in doing things properly.
That's a great story, and it is the perfect lead-in, as if it was planned, to the next point here on the implications of supply chain on cyber attack. So, Jones, if you want to kick this one off, and then Jeff and Tara add in as you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. So supply chain and service provider attacks are skyrocketing right now, and the reason it's stupid simple is you can attack one organization and affect many, and that means that the organization, the supply chain vendor or the service provider, is now under an excruciating amount of pressure to comply, right? Because you want things turned back on. You don't want this to get out. You don't want the hit to your reputation. And so that's why these organizations are being attacked more, and it's wildly successful. Criminal and nation state disruptions are probably the upper echelon of these things. I mentioned that named group, Alpha V or Black Cat, but there's lots of hostile nations out there that have state-funded hacking groups. I mean, it doesn't get much more capable than a nation-state funded organization, because their pockets are incredibly deep, and they're typically tied in with the national intelligence bureaus as well. Tara made a great comment earlier when it came to EMR systems, and that's that patients end up kind of in a bind here. If your healthcare provider is not doing what they need to be doing, you're at risk, really, because they're putting more and more records into EMR systems that are now web-facing, public-facing, which means that it's ultimately the patients that are going to pay the price for these things. A slight real-world anecdote: I had a doctor probably 5 years ago. They had a new EMR system. It had a public portal that I could go in when you get lab work done. They post it in the portal, and you can go view it there. When I went to create my account, it forced me into a password no longer than 8 characters that couldn't have any special symbols with it, right? Just letters and numbers. And I actually did send a very strongly worded message to the head doctors there, informing them, about the risk and that I was not consenting to do this. So, look out for those things, pay attention to them, call them out where you see them, because I think that's really important that those healthcare practices understand that that kinds of stuff is not acceptable. In the news, like I mentioned, the Henry Schein, there's several others here. 23andMe just very publicly had a humongous compromise. 7 million user records got hacked there. Ardent Health has 30 hospitals that have been affected. So these are the kinds of things that, even though the healthcare organization is the one impacted, people that need treatment, with hospitals out of service, surgeries aren't getting done, patients are being rerouted, which may mean longer time for a 911 call to get where they got to go, because an emergency room is out of business. So, these things are happening with more and more frequency every day. Though you don't have to look far to find a healthcare organization that's in some very deep trouble as a result of a cybersecurity compromise.
So, Jeff, we are about to dig into data protection strategies, so I'm going to have you on deck. But Tara, anything else you want to add on that before we flip over to the other side of the coin of one other of the key strategies here?
Yeah, sure. Just to further underscore, in the past, as consumers, as patients, we've always felt we've had the control to be able to opt out of services that we don't find secure, right? Back in time when Facebook first started making some major changes and got in the news for some data privacy, it was well within everyone's right to say, okay, well, then I just won't use the service, right? Same thing with 23andMe. A lot of people for a long time have had a position where we don't want our genetic data stored with a third party. So you choose not to do it, and that's okay too. But it does go back to the notion of almost all of our providers now are using EMRs or otherwise using technology systems to provide care. And in most of those cases, we don't have the ability as patients, as consumers, to opt out of those systems. So it does put us in a situation where if we want care and, if we want it done cohesively, where providers can, see each other's important information, that way we're cared for quickly and completely, then we're having to accept risk that maybe previously we wouldn't have accepted before.
Thank you for that additional context. And it is incredible how quickly these elements shift and change and sort of reinforce the point that you may think you have a strategy today, but it has to keep evolving because the risk landscape is changing just as fast. So Jeff, earlier you shared a couple of stats with us. Here are a few more just to sort of put a fine point tip on why this is so incredibly important. Anything else, sort of color, perspective to add here before you take us through how organizations are actually protecting against these risks?
What's interesting, I'll just highlight what Stephen pointed out in talking about the pressure on service providers who have many customers who are experiencing an outage when a service provider gets hit. That's one of the key points that differentiates ransomware outages from the other kinds of outages that I think all of us have seen over the course of our career. I've been doing data protection and compliance and disaster recovery solutions for organizations for about 25 years now. And it used to be that when you were planning for a catastrophic outage, you were planning for a sort of fire, flood, blood type event, right? And your customers understand if you have a fire in your data center, your customers understand if a tornado destroys a data center or a facility. Customers don't understand as well if you have a lapse in cybersecurity that leads to a compromise of data or to an outage. And that microscope, that very unflattering public attention, really ratchets up the pressure on organizations to pay ransoms and to try to solve this problem quickly, which might lead, for example, to Henry Schein having been reinfected 3 times because they didn't take the time to properly disinfect the data before it went back in on the network. All that pressure, if you apply it right, can lead you to make real changes in how you're protecting your data, and that's what we should dig into a little bit more in terms of specifics.
Excellent. So with that, take us through, Veeam continues to innovate here. So take us through some items that organizations can utilize to modernize their data protection strategies.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think we've seen and that I'm sure Dataprise's security practice has seen is that organizations that do best with modernizing their data protection, with modernizing their security posture, tend to take an iterative approach. They identify what the crown jewels are, they identify what would hurt the most. Obviously for healthcare providers, that's protected health information, but they identify that and make sure that they secure the most important things first, and they gradually make their organization more mature. There are some simple infrastructure-based changes that organizations can make that really strongly affect their ability to recover from ransomware attacks. We're going to talk about what we at Veeam call the data protection zip code, the 32110 rule, here on the next slide in more detail. But taking the steps to actually ask, if a threat actor got on my network and compromised every admin credential in the environment, have I set my backups up such that I would still have backups that couldn't be destroyed, that couldn't be deleted, that would be safe? That is the key question. There are different mechanisms for doing that. Again, we'll talk about 32110 in a second, but it's really important to recognize that a strong and secure solution to implement that, a solution that has maybe the least lead time, that doesn't suffer from supply chain issues on the customer side, is to work with a service provider like Dataprise, because you all already have the infrastructure in place to set up immutable backups, to set up secure offsite backups and disaster recovery for an organization tomorrow, if that's what they need. And it can really lower the barrier to entry and the time to get secure if organizations are scratching their head and if they're just getting started and haven't figured this out yet. So we have a great relationship with Dataprise here at Veeam. And the reason for that is that we've seen ourselves that service providers like Dataprise can really help organizations solve this problem faster and more securely than they could on their own. I'll refer back to a point that Stephen made before. He talked about different healthcare organizations outsourcing their security function or needing to hire outside consultants for security. The latest estimates that I saw are that there's over 750,000 vacant IT security jobs in North America alone, in the US, Canada, and Mexico alone. The number worldwide is 3 million. If you think about small healthcare practices, there's a very low percentage chance that they're going to be able to provide themselves with the best experts to solve these problems. Or if they do train those folks up, and you guys probably hear this from your customers the same as I do from mine, if they do train those folks up, then their security experts will leave for a more lucrative opportunity, after a year or two of experience. It happens all the time. So So it is important that you get good help doing this, and increasingly that means working with a service provider partner. But why don't we dig into a little bit more about actually keeping backups safe? And we'll focus on the data protection zip code here. Yeah, go ahead and build it out.
There we go. Let me make
Oh,
sure I got all the clicks in
yes,
there.
our builds got wonky. There we go. All right. So Veeam didn't actually invent the 3-2-1 rule. That was invented by a digital photographer over 30 years ago, who asked himself, what do I need to do to make sure my life's work doesn't go away if there's a hurricane or a fire in my office? The 3-2-1 rule just means that if you really want to keep your data safe, you need 3 copies of it, the production copy and 2 additional ones. Those additional copies should be on at least 2 different types of media. So in other words, I've seen this, I'm sure you at DataPrize have seen this in the past. It is not enough to carve out a partition on your production SAN and put your backups on the same storage array that all your production data is on. Because if a firmware update or a power outage takes the SAN down, then it takes down all your backups too. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to explain that to folks more than once, or they have to get bitten before they realize that's not what they need to do. But the rule says you need at least 2 different media types, and one of those should be off-site. That's the 3-2-1. The 1 and 0 are sort of Veeam added, and they relate specifically to cybersecurity. You need 1 copy of your data at least that is either offline or in other ways hyper resilient or immutable. And again, immutable just means that if a bad guy compromises your admin credentials by sneaking onto your network, that they can't delete your data. A tape that's been removed from its library and sent off-site is an immutable backup copy. Data that's been put up in a cloud service, and we'll talk more about that in just a second, that has immutable storage options, where the administrator in the customer's environment can't just log in and delete that backup data. That's another option for immutability, but there are several of them. The 0 refers to making sure that your backups are fit for purpose. You need some kind of automated way to make sure that your backups are working, that you could recover successfully if you needed to, but also you need some automation to make sure that you don't reinfect yourself, so you don't get hit by 3 different ransomware attacks in 2 months, like we heard about a couple of minutes ago. And those are important, and they are technology driven, and they're something that we provide at Veeam and that DataPrize with Veeam provide as well. So if we dig into immutability just a little bit more, the good news is if you've got a software and service-based solution like backup as a service and DR as a service from Veeam and DataPrize, you have a range of ways to get to good outcomes around immutability. There are numerous solutions you can put in your data center or in your offices that are storage-based that will solve this, even down to inexpensive, PC hardware, x86 server hardware, full of disks that's been configured and secured correctly according to Veeam design parameters. You can also do this with purpose-built backup appliances. There's a number of options out there, and you can do it with cloud-based storage services like Azure Blob and Azure Archive Blob Storage, both of which have options for true immutability. Once you turn on the retention period on those cloud-based storage, you can't delete that. You can't shorten the retention period. Again, even if you're a lead administrator, if your CEO, if whoever calls up Microsoft and says delete our storage, they're not going to do that, right? They're going to keep it for the length of time they've specified. And I know these solutions fold into what DataPrize offers, so maybe I'll flip the ball back over to you all to talk about what the DataPrize solution looks like in terms of immutability.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I dig into that, Jones, do you want to talk a little bit about how you see our clients pairing that cybersecurity with our data protection offering today?
Yeah, absolutely. When we have conversations with prospects and clients today, when we're talking about cybersecurity, we are also talking about data protection because they are 2 sides of the same coin. If you're providing adequate cybersecurity, you're also thinking about backing up your data, and not just for ransomware reasons. There's lots of reasons that, Jeff mentioned a couple of them: a fire, a natural disaster, hardware failures, All of these things are absolutely reasons you should have copies of data. The fact of the matter is it was stated earlier, cybersecurity attacks are almost always the first step is find backups and destroy them. And it's for this exact reason. So yes, we are absolutely having this conversation with every prospect, every client, every existing client that does not have some sort of immutable cloud backup for their systems. We are having that conversation with them all the time.
Perfect. And with that, I want to flip over. We have another one in here that touches on how Gartner outlines, but one component and where we've been really excited with working with Veeam is both from the immutability side and what we've done with that from an enhanced data protection of being able to keep those backups more protected from ransomware, as well as addressing all the other risks that organizations have and why they need to be able to access that data and bring it back online quickly, efficiently to recover from any whole host of incidents that could occur. So with that, Jeff, back to you to give us some more perspective on what our approaches from a multiple layers perspective for protection.
Yeah, I mentioned some of the Veeam research that we do earlier on. It's interesting, Gartner, I think everyone knows, is the leading or one of the leading industry analyst firms worldwide. They look into a lot of different implications of technology and business value and security worldwide in every vertical, and certainly in healthcare too. Interestingly, for ransomware, their recommendation is exactly what you would expect. Modern zero trust based security says you don't just have one layer of security that you assume that everything within that layer is safe. You have multiple layers, and you need to do the same thing for recovery. We don't find that Boeing and Airbus make large jet airliners with one really good engine. They make them with 4 engines, right? So that you can have something go wrong and you can still recover, you can still keep going. It's not a surprise that the recommendation on the IT side is like that too. And so the good news is, as we saw on the last slide, with the Veeam and Data Price solution, it's easy to put in place multiple layers of resilient storage so you can be genuinely secure.
Excellent. And talking about that layered approach, our next topic that we hear sort of ties into how you really have to think about where your data is, how you're protecting it, and all the different components that you need to hedge against. So with our fourth trend here, we're looking at healthcare being increasingly mobile. And there were many examples in the earlier conversation of how end users are accessing their data and using it. And obviously across healthcare, organizations, professionals, and then end users, mobile devices are prevalent, and they're only going to become more and more so, making it even more important for healthcare organizations to think about how they're protecting that data and accessing that data. And there were a couple of different areas that, as we're helping and working with clients in the healthcare industry, we are seeing common conversations, first on what they're trying to solve for from a mobile device protection standpoint and the challenges facing that. So one of them is both balancing the access and the security to data. And I would say, and Jones, you would probably agree, this is a challenge across the board. It's not just mobile devices, but making sure that you have the right level of protections in place, but you are allowing the end users to do what they need to do as fast as they need to do it, so that you don't hinder their productivity, or in this case, ability to deliver care. So that's one item that we are regularly seeing organizations sort of determine how they find that right balance. And it's regularly shifting and moving. Another one from the mobile device aspect is the diversity of devices in an organization. So beyond the fact that, IoT is a broad category, it may be a tablet, it may be a mobile device, it may be some type of end user component, but not only are the devices various, but so are the operating systems. So this can bring unique challenges on how you manage them in a uniform perspective, given the diversity of devices that individuals may be bringing into a healthcare organization, as well as those that are part of the corporate environment. And then beyond the device diversity component. It is the challenge that we see of getting healthcare professionals to understand and comply with the mobile device policies and procedures. It's absolutely critical that, once the policy is in place and the tools and technologies are there, there's that training and user adoption. And again, this is consistent across all security, but it's an area that needs to be pushed down to that mobile device component as well. And then one other sort of complexity or area that we are seeing clients think about as they're looking at how mobility is changing their strategies is the fact that it's continuously evolving and there are new updates, there are new challenges. So putting that in context of how you address the first three and then recognizing that constant change is something that we are seeing the mobile device evolution challenge healthcare organizations with. And I'm going to, before I jump into, actually, I will jump into the next slide on what are the implications. But Tara, I'd love to bring you in to see how you sort of are seeing clients think about this mobile device planning and components.
Sure. So mobile devices, as you've been talking about, are increasingly common. And at the time, right, you'd say, well, patients and consumers, well, healthcare practices as well, healthcare practices themselves. We see that in particular as it relates to SMS messaging between patients and providers. That's especially with the advent over the past few years of concierge medicine, as it's become called, where it allows patients to essentially have on-demand access to their providers for a premium. But those are especially reliant on mobile technologies. Another one has to do with, video telehealth visits. Those are also taking place on mobile devices, not just at the computers that you're sitting in front of. So it becomes relevant because, when we're sitting down at a computer, we're used to things like having to enter a password for work, or having to enter a password to proceed, something like that. Now we all need to start thinking as well, if my provider has their cell phone with them at dinner, ready for my message, is their device locked? What are their practices with holding on to their device? Is it secure? Who else has access to that? Can people see me? And these are the types of things we need to be cognizant of. When we have convenience that is right in front of us, we need to, just as importantly, look at the security that's needed to facilitate that convenience.
Yeah, that's a great commentary on how it's shifting. And on this slide, we sort of outlined what are 6 or 7 key elements for when an organization is building their mobile device management strategy, but then also using technology to enforce that device security. So everything from encryptions to passcodes to being able to remotely wipe to being able to control, what applications are on there. Are they up to date? Quarantine off different types of data. So really being able to get control of those devices is a key thing that we expect in 2024. Organizations will continue to evolve and be challenged with. Before we flip off of this one, Jones, anything you want to share on what you're seeing from that mobile device security aspect?
I think the thing that I'd like to share, and it actually, something you said on the prior slide triggered the thought in my head, and it's kind of like I have to be the bad guy to say it, which is that security is inconvenient, and that's just a fact. We do try our best to balance not encumbering the user with ensuring we're allowing them to do the stuff and things that they need to do and to be productive without being overly intrusive. But the fact of the matter is that security is inconvenient, and it's inconvenient for a reason. It would be far more convenient to not have a front door in your house, to just walk in and out as you need. You got a handful of groceries, you don't have to worry about turning a handle or pushing a door open. That would be way more convenient. But we need a little bit of inconvenience there for the added security. And cybersecurity is no different. Things like MDM and MFA and policies and all these other things are necessary. And I think it's just something that everybody needs to understand. is that all of these things are done for a reason, and that there is going to be a modicum of inconvenience that comes with them.
Perfect. And I know we could go on and on about those initial topics, and it just shows how fast the industry is evolving and changing in so many areas, and where, you know, we're saying 2024 that these are some of the top trends you need to plan for, but it's just a constant evolution of continuous improvement and involvement to protect an organization. So that brings us to trend number 5, which is our all-encompassing, every department is rethinking their strategies. And we put this out here for a number of reasons. One, to reiterate the point that patient data, organizational data is seeping into so many different places, and it's incredibly important to recognize that, to look at your technology and modernization strategies holistically, to be able to ensure that you're protecting that, following regulations, etc. So one we highlighted here is an example from Google Analytics, right? A tool that is used to collect tracking information across website visits, can also inadvertently collect protected healthcare information or in PII related to patients. And so, you know, Google Analytics is not HIPAA compliant. They're very clear on that. And their point is you need to know what data they are collecting. You need to know how you are protecting it. And you need to think broadly about how that data sits within your organization, or it doesn't. And so the point here is that recognizing that trends are moving fast, data is pervasively getting everywhere, and how you continue to stay current with that. Another one that we've seen that sort of ties to, again, Google is like, we do not have business associate agreements in place. So touching on BAAs is the fact that they are continuing to evolve and have new requirements on how partners protect the confidentiality and security of patient data. So as these continue to evolve, it's both ensuring that the partner organizations that you're working with are aligned with that to ensure the data is protected, and that you're planning for that as part as your 2024 strategy and beyond. And then finally, you know, the challenges with identifying where exposure and vulnerabilities occur. That is one, again, that transcends so many different parts of an organization that businesses need to be thinking about. So with that, we're going to flip over to our final 2 IT implication slides. And I teed up the thought that data is everywhere, which I think we all know. But Jones, if you want to chime in here, and then Jeff, I know you have some great stats for us on sort of that digital transformation aspect and putting a fine point on the fact of this evolution.
Sure. So to your point, data is everywhere. It lives in all kinds of different systems, cloud-based, on-prem, personal devices. It's really incumbent on the organizations to understand where their data is, what it is, because you can't be adequately protecting it if you don't even know what you have or where it's sitting. So this is a huge undertaking. There's a lot of organizations, healthcare organizations, with a lot of technical debt here because they've got data strewn about all over the place, and they're really not terribly aware. So getting your arms around that is going to be, you know, the first step in ensuring that you can achieve and maintain your compliance for all of the, you know, regulatory frameworks that you're beholden to, as well as cybersecurity and things like that.
Perfect. And Jeff, before I bring you in on this next slide for the digital transformation, Tara, anything else you want to share on how you're seeing it sort of change the way organizations are thinking about their strategies?
Luckily, a lot of organizations are focusing on that data governance issue first, which is a paramount step, like Jones was saying, in knowing what data you have and where it is. You can't really stand there and say, well, the entirety of our sensitive data is within this EMR, kind of going with that example again, because that's probably not entirely true. They need to step back and say, well, that's where it's meant to always live. But what are the other practices that go on within our organization that take it outside of that system, right? So that's going to be everything from taking, you know, a paper note to an email, maybe with a patient, and other interactions that occur outside of those systems. So it is important for organizations to step back and say, okay, we know the ideal state, we know where we want it to all be, but where else does it live, either inadvertently or maybe intentionally, but without really putting into place systems to protect it.
Perfect. And with that, let's bring this to life. Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, so digital transformation is a phrase we've all heard a lot in the last couple of years, and it's useful because it's a nice umbrella term to encompass lots of things that healthcare providers are going through now, from remote work to integrating new technologies like AI, et cetera, et cetera. Every year in the Data Protection Trends Report, we ask, okay, you're trying to modernize, you're trying to digitally transform your business. What's stopping you? And what's interesting, if you look at the number one blocker, the two bars here, if you could pick everything, that's the blue bar. If you could pick just the worst thing, the most significant thing, only one, that's the green bar. You'll notice that security is the number one blocker, both as the most significant challenge, and if you could pick everything, it's the one that most people picked. Compliance, that is to say regulatory implementation, is not the top, but if you figure that compliance is very closely linked with security, those are quite closely linked, together those two add up to be kind of an overwhelming vote. You need to get your security house and your compliance house in order, especially in the healthcare industry, which is so heavily regulated and so compliance focused, if you're going to successfully implement new technologies and digitally transform.
Jeff, I'm going to stick with you. We are now to closing comments and questions. Unfortunately, we had such a great conversation here. We are going to take the questions offline. So apologies to those that did submit them. We will follow up with you. But Jeff, sticking with you, give us your closing thoughts, and then we'll go round robin and wrap it up.
I've enjoyed the conversation today. It's been really nice listening to Jones and listening to Tara, and you talk about the challenges that healthcare providers are facing. If I could leave folks with one thing, there is help out there. You don't need to be paralyzed in the face of the challenges on the security and compliance front that you're facing. And Veeam and DataPrize have built a pretty good solution for that. So I'll turn that over to the DataPrize team now.
Perfect. Tara, over to you.
Sure. One of the things that we really enjoy doing within the advisory practice is helping healthcare clients and other clients that also have data sensitivity needs or compliance obligations. We start from the very first step of wherever they are. We meet them where they are. It starts with consultative discussions, and then almost as a last measure, really, at the very last step is when the technology comes into play. But there's a lot of groundwork that goes into it before we start making changes to technology. It doesn't mean these things can't happen quickly and that these conversations can't be efficient. But it is important to have conversations like that before you pick any tool and just assume that that'll be the solution to all your problems. We want to help you make sure that the tools that you're choosing and the way that you're implementing them really do help you meet your compliance obligations.
Excellent. And Jones, take us home.
Awesome. So I want to do a callback to the story that I told about Henry Schein. And the reason is a lot of healthcare organizations are actually growing right now through acquisition. Healthcare is certainly a space like cybersecurity that's not going to go away. It's getting bigger. Henry Schein was growing, 10 to 20%. They're growing through acquisition. They were really blowing up very quickly. But they were so focused on growing that they weren't focused on consolidating and being proactive about their cybersecurity. And ultimately, they're paying a huge price. And I'm not saying this to necessarily shame or kick a dead horse here. This is a real world example. This could be any of you that are listening right now. If you're not taking the necessary steps to be proactive with your cybersecurity. So DataPrize has a number of different options and services that can help you with things like that. So if you have any feeling or inkling that there may be a rock left unturned in your cyber program and how proactive you're being, please reach out and talk to somebody, and we're happy to help put a plan together.
Perfect. And to put a fine point on that, and first, thank you to all our attendees, as well as my 3 experts that joined us here today. Great conversation and great information and knowledge that can be applied. As each of you mentioned, DataPrize is here, along with our partnership with Veeam, to support clients where they are on their journey, and whether it's covering those initial bases or farther along, we have the internal expertise and services to be able to do that. So here's a couple of resources that we have available. We will be providing these post-event via email as well. But thank you again. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on our next event.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Mary Beth.